Will 2022 still be dominated by the COVID-19 pandemic? Will Singaporeans know who their next Prime Minister will be? And will elections in Asia signal a shift in how voters view China and the US? Well, in this week's Insight, we look ahead to some of the biggest issues of the new year with our editors here at the Straits Times. Let's begin with news editor Karamjit Kaur. Karamjit is one of the editors leading ST's coverage of the pandemic since it began. So Karamjit, the question on everyone's mind, how will the pandemic play out in Singapore this year?
There are really two things happening concurrently. One is that the number of Omicron cases is very likely going to increase and increase very quickly. So, infections could reach 10,000 or even 15,000 cases a day, maybe even more. And that's really about 3 times the number of infections we saw at the height of the Delta variant peak. Omicron cases are also very likely to double every 2 to 3 days. The consolation, though, is that Omicron infections do appear milder, and it does seem that boosters do work to prevent serious infections. So that's the first thing that's happening. But even as we prepare for this wave, we know that after 2 years of COVID, Singapore cannot continue on this path. How will 2022 play out? Now, PM Lee, in his New Year's Day message, said this will be a time of transition with the economy recovering steadily after 2 years of the pandemic. And a key point he made was that the upcoming rise in the GST tax will be tackled in Budget 2022, which will be delivered on February the 18th. So really, this is the year Singapore must walk the COVID-19 endemic talk. We must truly learn to live with the virus. And that really is not about going back to pre-pandemic days, but we do have to find new ways to operate and new ways to live. And this is something all of us are going to have to think about, whether you're a business owner, organizations, as well as individuals. For businesses, for example, relying on handouts and grants cannot be the long-term solution, for example. So we know that we must transition to build the lift the economy, to rebuild the air hub, and really to help Singaporeans reclaim their lives. But this is not going to be easy, not for the country, not for its people, because really the fear of being infected remains very real for many people. Never mind that they've had 2 jabs plus the booster, and never mind that they know that vaccines do help to significantly reduce the risk of serious illness. Anecdotally, we hear of people who are afraid to leave their homes, for example, especially if they live with vulnerable seniors. And many people still feel quite uneasy in big crowds, and they worry about traveling, in case they get stuck overseas if the rules change. So it's not going to be easy, but with good planning, with vaccines, with good hygiene, with personal responsibility, hopefully it will help. And the hope is that when this year comes to an end, Singapore will truly be a COVID-19 resilient nation.
News editor Karamjit Kaur. Well, let's turn to politics and the big question of who will succeed Lee Hsien Loong as Prime Minister. Well, the plan was for Singapore to see its 4th Prime Minister by February 2022 when Mr. Lee turns 70. But when designated 4G leader Heng Swee Keat stepped aside last year, the issue of succession went back to square one. Well, let's bring in political editor Zakir Hussain. Zakir, is the 4G team expected to announce a new leader anytime soon?
The 4G team isn't really expected to announce a new leader in the months ahead, but the clock is ticking, and I think one key milestone will be November, when the People's Action Party holds its once in 2 years party conference, where cadres elect the leader. They would like to lead them for the next few years. 3 of the 4G leaders are seen as key contenders for this post. First is Education Minister Chen Singh, who is Second Assistant Secretary General. As Education Minister and Minister in charge of the Civil Service, he still oversees several key areas. The other 2 contenders are Finance Minister Lawrence Wong, who will be delivering his first budget on February 18th. And I think he's been in the public spotlight for some time now. One key challenge for him is to carry the ground on the impending GST hike. And the third contender is Health Minister Ong Ye Kung, who's been appointed to co-chair the multi-ministry task force tackling the pandemic. And again, one key challenge for him is convincing Singaporeans of Singapore's approach to living with COVID-19, as well as outlining and implementing the roadmap for Singapore to emerge stronger from the pandemic. All three leaders, I think, and many of their other team members will be playing key roles, I think, in the months ahead. And I think, hopefully come the end of this year, we might be clearer as to who might be the possible successor to PM Lee.
And that was political editor Zakir Hussain. Away from Singapore, one issue could sway how voters cast their ballots in a number of elections across Asia this year. And it's where candidates stand on the superpowers, China and the United States. Foreign editor Bhagyashree Garekar is here with us. Bhagya, how will this impact upcoming polls in the region?
Well, that's a tricky question. Now, in elections, people care about everyday issues, jobs, price of food, COVID-19. Foreign policy would not figure there. But what I say is that a candidate's stance on the US and China matters because it is part of the candidate's image. And candidates do take their cues from voters. If you look at opinion polls across Asia, you can see that people do have definite attitudes towards the US and towards China. So let's look at South Korea, which has a presidential election on March the 9th. South Koreans today hold a less favorable view of China than they did 5 years ago. That sentiment is mirrored in the race. So both the candidates running to succeed President Moon Jae-in have taken a much harder line on China. Then look at the Philippines. It has elections on May the 9th. President Duterte has been far friendlier to China than the previous presidents. He's popular with the Filipinos, and the front-runner is Mr. Ferdinand Marcos Jr., who says that Mr. Duterte has the right policies on China. But then surveys will show you that Filipinos trust the US more than China. So is that a good thing for Ms. Leni Robredo, who says that she will take a tough line on China? Does that matter to voters? She's running second in polls. Will she catch up? Now, I'm not saying that voters will choose one candidate over another because one has a more pro-US or pro-China policy. But increasingly, voters are conscious of these differences. Why? Because the US and China rivalry is playing out in our region. So we should not be surprised if that does get reflected in elections.
Foreign editor Bhagyashree Garekar. ST's editors have been looking ahead to the biggest issues in 2022. Will workers go back to the office and will travel bounce back? For more predictions about everything from interest rates and inflation to the World Cup in Qatar, you'll find the story in the link below.